There we go. All right, I think we're rolling now. Yay!
Nice.
And welcome to Caitlin Marceau, who wrote The Water, which is our first story in Not Just a Pretty Face, Women of Horror, Volume 1. How are you today?
I'm good. You?
Good, good. It's a little bit gray out, so, well, I mean, my webcam doesn't pick up very well anyways, but with the not being very bright out today, the lighting isn't good in here, so I don't know if I'm
It's
sure you
okay.
can see me, but
Again, yeah.
that's great. So tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're drawn to writing horror.
Oh man. Okay, so well, I'm a writer. I'm an artist, tattoo apprentice, and I'm also a college English teacher. So I do a bunch of different things, kind of all over the place. Um, I've always liked horror for a couple of different reasons. I enjoyed the fact that you're able to get across all kinds of, social political issues, but like through sometimes a more relatable means than other times, or other genres rather. I like the idea of not just exploring, the horror that, the world has to offer, but also the strength of characters. I like the idea of exploring relationships, which I find can really come out and get highlighted in horror. Um, and I think the thing that first actually drew me to horror was the fact that I hated it. I used to be really scared of anything even remotely scary. Used to have crazy nightmares when I was growing up. And
Oh
I
no.
think that, made me want to push myself instead of being afraid all the time to like make other people afraid. So that was what drew me to it. And since then, I haven't had any issues.
Yeah. Do you find that dreams and nightmares inform any of your stories at all, or?
Oh, definitely. For sure. One of the first pieces I wrote called Stuck is about this woman who wakes up and she wakes up dead. Um, she's conscious. She can see everything that's happening around her, but she's trapped in her body. She passed away in her sleep essentially. And that was from like a really bad nightmare I had. And then like a bout of sleep paralysis. And I was like, this would be the scariest thing if you just woke up and then had like no autonomy over your body, you had, passed away. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty scary. So tell us about your story, The Water.
So it's about this girl. She's a runner. She's an asthmatic, and she's been told her whole life to stay away from Lachine Canal. That there's something wrong with the water, to stay away from it. And then one day, she decides to go for a run, and she runs by it, and horrible things happen. The warning was there for a reason. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
found it very, very unsettling. Lachine Canal, is that in Montreal? I've never been to Montreal, so
it is. Yeah. It's in here.
yeah. So do you ever like go by it and wonder, about some of the things that
I do, and I mean, I never used to. It was really weird. I for the longest time wanted to create like different, not different universes. I tried to situate most of my horror in Canada, but I was kind of creating like, fictional cities and like, little suburbs that didn't exist. And then I ended up going on this like Montreal ghost tour like 5, 6 years ago. And they would take us by these historical places or places you didn't really realize had any significance to them. And they would talk about these like horrible things that happened and the ghosts that were in that area. And they all happened to be like near and around the Lachine Canal. And then it got me thinking, what other buildings, what other, boroughs in Montreal and in Canada have these, hidden crazy horror stories that we just don't know about. So instead of, finding real ones, I decided to find real buildings or real cities and invent my own. And Lachine Canal was an inspiration because of how many ghost stories are like in the surrounding area.
Mhm. Oh, I love doing that. Sometimes you just do a deep dive into the local history, and
Yeah.
your experience of a place just gets so much richer. And Montreal has so much history and culture.
Yeah.
It's even among tourists, they love it for its ambience and its Europeanness, right in the middle of Canada. They're like, "What is this place?"
Yeah, it's definitely I know I love my city. I'm lucky to live here. I think the first story I did that involved Montreal history and horror was actually it's like a borough in Montreal called Point St. Charles, and it was for a collection I did a long time ago with a publisher called Shadows at the Door. And it was such a great experience, not just researching like that particular neighborhood, but I set my story in the 60s. So I actually ended up doing this really great intensive research with my dad, who, he grew up in Point St. Charles. He was there in the 60s, and it was just such a nice, not just like a dive into history, but a really great bonding experience for me and my dad. It was like family history. So that was really fun. Yeah.
Oh, that
Tremendously good.
sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you consider some of your horror writing influences? That's always like a generic question, but it's always interesting to find out where authors' backgrounds come from.
So it's actually really funny. I didn't really have a lot of horror influences growing up because I was so scared of just everything. Like I remember like I had a reoccurring nightmare as a child about Lunette the clown. So like I was a real wimp growing up. So I didn't get into horror until I was in university, college and university. So I guess my influences are more for like the female protagonists and kind of trying to create these realistic and strong and relatable female characters. And those influences come from Tamora Pierce, Kelly Armstrong, who I, got into when I was in college. She does a lot of horror. I think she's also, if I'm not mistaken, from Ontario. So she's another Canadian writer. She's fantastic. So I would say she's definitely been influential on my horror as I get older. And then Bentley Little, he was probably the first like real horror author I got into before, discovering Kelly Armstrong and the rest of them. And his stuff was just wild and off the hook. So yeah, I hope that anyways.
Do you think there's and we sort of touched on this in my discussion last night with Valerie Williams. Do you think that there is a real difference between literary stories and horror stories, or is it just most people want to write what they want to write, but they have to put on airs? Or
It's actually really funny. This was a huge point of contention for me in university.
I
So
went
actually,
through it too.
yeah. Yeah, I studied creative writing at the university level. That's what my degree is in. And that was actually a huge issue for a lot of people there, is just to get into the university program, I wasn't allowed to submit any horror pieces. You couldn't have any genre literature pieces. They wanted real writing, which pisses me off because you can absolutely have horror that is, literary, whatever that is, right? That touches on like genuine connections between people and real relationships. I think horror is probably one of the most perfect avenues to explore everyday socio-political issues, right? Like racism, systemic, injustice, women's issues, like Rosemary's Baby, I think is like probably one of the most on the nose examinations of like bodily autonomy and, female reproductive rights. And that's horror. And I think it does a great job of it. Even though I believe it was written by a man, I still think it's a very telling story. So I don't think you can write, or I don't think you have to write horror or literary. I think they can absolutely exist and be the same thing. I think people just need to maybe open up their minds a bit on that and maybe ask themselves what it really means to be literary. Yeah, no, I don't see why they can't exist together.
Yeah, well, I always found that literary was more a style than than a function of what the story itself was. It was just how it was written that made it literary, whether as opposed to a more accessible pulpy style, and to try to put it on the shelf as, oh, this is a literary story. I mean, some of the greatest literature ever is horror. I mean, your Dracula and your Frankenstein, and so yeah, it always after I got past that trying to be literary nonsense, yeah, it just words are words. You open it up.
I feel like I bamboozled my university because I sent in like a very like literary portfolio. It dealt with a lot of like women's rights issues, and it dealt with a lot of like marriage inequality and income inequality. And the second I was admitted to the program, I only wrote horror. And all of my stories tried to address social injustices, or they tried to touch on, everyday experiences and the horror that just is in real life. But I refused to submit anything from drama to poetry to prose that didn't have to do with horror. I refused. I was like, I'm writing what I want to write. Jokes on them. Yes.
That's great. Well,
Yeah.
See, I always tried to write what was expected of me, not you know, what I wanted to write. I didn't even know what I wanted to write until.
Yeah.
um, so the next story, where can we find some of your other writing?
Oh, I'm all over the place. Like I said, I have a couple of things published with Shadows at the Door. They had a print anthology that came out. I want to say it was in 2016. It might have been 2017. I feel like it's escaping me now. I was also in Sanitarium magazine when it was owned by Barry Skellhorn. But I think right now that's not available in print. It's coming out again. They're like rebranding it. So that's coming out later. Um, I've been in all kinds of things. I was in I think it was Women in Horror Annual #1, Campfire Quarterly or Creepy Campfire Quarterly a while ago. And I have a new co-authored rural fantasy actually that came out last summer with Chris Holt, and it's called Caribou Chronicles. And it's
Okay.
not horror remotely, but it's all comedy, and it's very Canadian, and it's fantasy and mythological creatures with like a very, Canadian twist. So like instead of centaurs, we have like half man, half caribou instead of half man, half horse. So things
That
like
sounds
that.
that
Yeah.
sounds like a lot of fun. That sounds
Yeah.
like fun.
And
Uh,
if anybody wants to listen to me as opposed to reading my stuff, I have a podcast out called Fedorable. I co-host that with a gentleman named Will, and the whole thing it looks at neckbeard culture. So it looks at, the way certain men treat women and women's issues and, misogyny and incels and all of these things that are terrifying. um, yeah. And I have another one that's coming out later this year, early next year, called Right on Time. That's all about writing and getting into it, at exactly the right moment for you. So
Great. I guess you can. I mean, obviously I can talk all day about horror. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
um, I don't think so. I mean, just thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in a lovely collection. I'm so excited to be part of it. It was
Yeah,
a
so
great.
am I. We've got some great stories, and I really hope that people will, kind of stumble on the interview and want to learn more about the book. And your story is just great. I think it's just such a great way to kick off the collection. So
Thank you so much.
yeah. All right, so we'll probably wrap this up now, and I'll put your links down in the comments, and people can check out some more of your stuff. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. So you have a great rest of your day, and thanks again for the chat.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.